The room went silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. My wife's eyes widened, her lips trembling, and then splash! Red wine exploded across her face. The sparkling hall froze, guests gasping, champagne glasses frozen midair. I could barely breathe. My daughter-in-law stood there, face flushed, staring at the torn fabric of her mother-in-law's carefully stitched wedding dress like it was the end of the world. And in that moment, I realized everything I thought I knew about family, about trust, about my own home had been a lie. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had experienced a family gathering turning into chaos over something trivial. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day at my son's wedding, a day that should have been pure joy. It all started months earlier with whispers I thought I ignored. My daughter-in-law, who appeared so sweet, had a storm brewing beneath that smile. Every conversation about the wedding, the dresses, the seating arrangements carried a tension I pretended I didn't notice. I kept telling myself, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe she's just stressed. But the first warning came when she mentioned the wedding dress she insisted my wife absolutely couldn't wear. "It's too flashy," she said. "It clashes with the theme." My wife, ever the gracious mediator, tried to reason with her, but her words were met with thinly veiled contempt. I thought it was a minor disagreement, a ripple in the calm, until the day of the wedding. The morning started beautifully, flowers, laughter, and sunlight streaming into the hall, but by the time we arrived, something had shifted in the air. I noticed the way she looked at my wife, not with dislike, but with a simmering, dangerous obsession over control. And when the first dress-fitting issue came up, I felt the first flicker of fear, though I didn't know it yet. Guests began to arrive, unaware of the tension brewing in the corners. My son was radiant, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him in the middle of his happiest day. And then the inevitable confrontation happened. A simple tug on a hem, a misplaced comment, a spark that ignited into a full-blown eruption. I froze as my daughter-in-law's hand tightened around the wine glass. Time slowed. I wanted to shout, to stop it, but it was too late. The glass went airborne, a blur of red cutting through the golden sunlight. My wife's gasp echoed in my ears, the sound of betrayal sharper than any argument I'd ever known. And as everyone watched in horror, the hall seemed to shrink around us, a pressure cooker ready to explode. And just as I was about to step in, she said something that made my stomach drop even further, a sentence that I will never forget, and one that changed the course of this family forever. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like shards of glass. "If she's going to ruin my perfect day, she deserves a lesson." My daughter-in-law's voice, calm yet venomous, cut through the hum of chatter and music in the hall. Guests froze mid-step, unsure whether to intervene or pretend nothing had happened. My wife's face, smeared with red wine, reflected shock, humiliation, and hurt that no apology could erase. My heart pounded, not with anger, but with a deep, paralyzing sadness. I wanted to rush forward, to pull her away, but every instinct I had told me to pause, to see just how far this could go. And then I noticed my son's expression, the first crack in his perfect wedding smile. Confusion, disbelief, and a tinge of guilt, as though he had known, deep down, that this day might implode in ways he couldn't control. The wine-stained dress glistened under the chandelier lights. My wife's hand shook as she dabbed at the red blotches, but she didn't cry, not yet. That reserved composure was her shield, one I admired, yet now it only made the betrayal more piercing. I glanced around the room and realized that everyone was watching, not just my family, but friends, distant relatives, strangers who had been invited to witness a celebration now transformed into a battlefield. It wasn't just about the dress or the wine or even the day that had been planned with love. It was about power, control, and the hidden resentment my daughter-in-law had nurtured quietly, almost invisibly for months. She had a talent for disguising malice behind smiles and nods, for planting seeds of doubt and tension without anyone noticing until it was too late. And now, standing there with wine dripping down her arm, she was no longer hiding it. I stepped closer to my wife, trying to shield her from further humiliation, but my presence seemed almost meaningless. She whispered to me, words trembling but resolute, "He doesn't even see it yet. He thinks she's innocent." My son, still frozen in shock, hadn't spoken a word. I realized that no matter what I did, the truth of her betrayal was going to hit him like a freight train, and there would be no gentle way to break it. Guests murmured among themselves, some pretending to laugh nervously, others frozen in stunned silence. The photographer, oblivious to the tension, kept snapping, capturing smiles and wine stains alike. I wanted to scream at him, to destroy the images before they ever reached social media. But there was no stopping this cascade. The perfect wedding, the celebration we had all dreamed of, was disintegrating in real time. Then came the next move, subtle but deliberate. My daughter-in-law's eyes darted toward my wife, a mixture of satisfaction and defiance flashing in her gaze. "You should have listened," she said quietly, loud enough for only a few to hear. Those words were not just for my wife, they were a challenge to everyone present. It was her declaration that she could disrupt, intimidate, and rewrite the narrative of this family at will. I glanced at my son again, his lips pressed tightly together, his hands trembled slightly, clutching the bouquet he was supposed to hand to his bride. And then, the moment that made me understand just how deep the cracks ran. He didn't confront her. He didn't step in to defend his mother. Instead, he looked away, a fleeting shadow of doubt crossing his face. Was it fear? Was it loyalty to his new wife, or had he already internalized the chaos, too stunned to react? I wanted to pull him aside, to remind him who his mother was, who had raised him, and the values we had tried to instill. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I saw it, how easily this wedding, our family, could fracture under the weight of unchecked malice. It wasn't just wine on a dress, it was the first tangible crack in the foundation of our relationships, a warning sign of the deeper storms to come. As I tried to regain some control, a hush fell over the hall. My daughter-in-law's mother, standing nearby, gave a sharp laugh, but it wasn't warm or jovial, it was taunting, as if she had been waiting for this moment, perhaps even orchestrating it from the sidelines. That glance, the barely there smirk, made it clear this was not an isolated act of anger. This was a statement, a calculated move in a game of family politics and power. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. My wife's hand remained firmly in mine, a silent promise that we would weather this together. And in that brief connection, I realized the depth of what had just happened. This wasn't merely an embarrassing incident, it was a signal that the dynamics within our family had shifted irrevocably. Trust, once implicit, now had to be fought for, defended, and perhaps rebuilt from scratch. But even as I steadied myself, I knew something else. This was only the beginning. The torn dress, the splashed wine, the shocked guests, they were symptoms of a larger conflict, one that had been brewing in the shadows unnoticed, and now it was coming for all of us, piece by piece, and there was no turning back. I could feel the tension in the room like a living entity, crawling into every corner, whispering secrets that no one dared speak aloud. Everyone present sensed it, even the children who were playing nearby, unaware of the storm. And then, just as I thought the moment couldn't escalate further, my daughter-in-law moved again, her next action more deliberate, more shocking, and more destructive than anyone could have anticipated. Time seemed to slow as all eyes fixed on her, and in that instant I realized the wedding wasn't just ruined, something much darker was unfolding, a betrayal that would change relationships, loyalties, and trust in ways that no apology could repair. The room seemed to contract around us, as if the walls themselves were recoiling from the chaos. Every guest felt it, an invisible current of shock, tension, and unspoken fear. My daughter-in-law, standing with calculated composure, had just made her move, and the ripples were spreading faster than I could anticipate. I looked at my wife, whose dress now bore the permanent mark of humiliation. She wasn't crying, not yet, but the fire in her eyes told me she was calculating, planning, and trying desperately to maintain her dignity in front of a crowd that had just witnessed her public betrayal. That fire, though, couldn't hide the sting. Every smile she had given, every careful word she had spoken seemed to have been ignored, trampled, and replaced with this act of malice. My son finally spoke, his voice a low tremor. "Mom, He paused, searching for words, but none came. His gaze shifted uneasily between his wife and his mother. It was the first moment I saw the child I had raised caught between two worlds, loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. But in that pause, in that indecision, I realized something terrifying. He was already losing the war of his own family's trust. The guests, sensing the tension, began whispering among themselves. Some tried to laugh it off, masking their discomfort with polite smiles. Others glanced at their phones, perhaps already imagining social media posts capturing this perfect disaster. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a wedding incident. It was the beginning of a public unraveling. I moved closer to my wife, gently taking her hand in mine. "It's going to be okay," I whispered. But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. How could I promise that when the next act of betrayal was already lurking, waiting to strike? Then came the most shocking moment. My daughter-in-law didn't run or hide. She didn't apologize. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only those nearest could hear. "I told you, she shouldn't have worn that dress. Some lines aren't meant to be crossed." Her words were deliberate, sharp as knives. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't embarrassed, she was proud, and in that pride lay something far more dangerous than anger: premeditation. I could feel the collective shock in the room. Her mother, watching from the sidelines, smirked again. That smirk carried a story of its own, years of grooming, influence, and manipulation that had taught her daughter that family could be bent to her will, and now the results were on full display for everyone to see. I glanced at my son again, desperate to see the man I knew, the man who had grown up with love and guidance. But he was frozen, his features tight, his jaw set, a storm brewing behind his eyes. I realized then that he was grappling with a truth too heavy for a single day. The woman he had married, the woman he had trusted, had just humiliated his mother in front of everyone he cared about. And that realization was breaking him in a way that words couldn't yet describe. Guests began murmuring louder, the whispers of gossip and judgment filling the air like smoke. Some older relatives shook their heads in disbelief. Friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, and through it all, I watched my daughter-in-law stand firm, as if daring anyone to challenge her. She had escalated the situation to a point where any intervention would seem like overreaction. She was in control, and I felt the chilling truth settle in my chest. We were no longer in a celebration. We were in a battlefield. My wife, ever composed but now trembling slightly, whispered something under her breath. "It's not over. I won't let this define us." The words were soft but resolute, a promise that she would fight, even if the fight was invisible to everyone else. I squeezed her hand, silently agreeing, knowing that the path ahead would be fraught with confrontation, pain, and a reckoning we hadn't yet prepared for. And then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, another act unfolded. My daughter-in-law moved toward the cake table, deliberately knocking over a tray of desserts. Chocolate and strawberries splattered across the floor, and the guests gasped anew. It wasn't just chaos, it was symbolism. Every carefully planned element of this wedding, every detail, every moment of joy was now contaminated by her deliberate actions. I wanted to stop her, to intervene, but I knew that any attempt would only escalate the confrontation. And deep down, I also understood something more insidious. She wanted attention, validation, and domination. She wanted to see the ripple effect of her actions, the way fear and confusion spread quietly among the guests. And she was succeeding, far beyond what I could imagine. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't simply about wine or a dress or even a wedding. This was about exposure, revealing the hidden fractures in our family, the unspoken resentments, the vulnerabilities we had ignored for too long. Every glance, every whispered comment, every shocked silence was a testament to the underlying truth. We had underestimated her, and now we were paying the price. And as I watched, I realized the most terrifying part. She wasn't finished. The wine, the dress, the dessert, they were only the beginning. This was a calculated crescendo, a storm building toward a moment none of us could yet see, but would remember forever. Time seemed to stretch. Guests were unsure whether to leave or stay, whether to intervene or observe. My wife's hands were still trembling slightly, but her posture was upright, defiant. My son's face was pale, his body stiff, and I could see the internal battle raging in his eyes. Protect his wife or protect his mother. And I knew in that instant that the decisions he would make in the next few minutes would define the family for years to come. Then came the final moment of part 3, the one that would leave everyone breathless and shatter the fragile calm of what remained of the wedding. My daughter-in-law turned slowly, her gaze sweeping the room, and whispered with a chilling calm, "You thought this was about a dress. You have no idea what's coming next." And with that, she walked away, leaving silence, tension, and fear in her wake. The hall was silent now, but the air still vibrated with the echoes of what had just happened. Guests huddled in small clusters, whispering, speculating, their eyes darting between my wife, my son, and the daughter-in-law who had just unleashed chaos with deliberate precision. Every whispered word felt like a dagger slicing through the fragile veneer of celebration. I turned to my wife, who was dabbing at the red stains with a napkin, her face pale but defiant. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of trying to process the betrayal she had just endured. "It's okay," I murmured, though my own voice felt hollow. How could it be okay when trust had been shattered in front of everyone we knew? I realized in that moment that the wine on her dress wasn't just a stain, it was a symbol of deception, manipulation, and the fact that appearances can be so misleading. For months, we had seen smiles, handshakes, and polite gestures, all the while unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. And now that storm had arrived in all its force. I glanced at my son, still frozen, his face tight with indecision. He hadn't spoken since the incident. His silence was deafening. It wasn't just shock, it was the weight of realization pressing down on him. For the first time, he was seeing his wife not as the woman he had fallen in love with, but as someone capable of calculated cruelty. And in that realization, he was lost, unsure of what to do next. My daughter-in-law, meanwhile, had retreated to a corner, speaking quietly with her mother, but her eyes kept scanning the room. She wanted to witness the ripple effect of her actions, the way tension had spread, the way fear and confusion had taken hold. And it worked. Every glance, every hesitant smile, every shift in body language told her that she had succeeded in asserting control. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was about understanding the depths of her motives and realizing that the wedding incident was only the fragment of a much larger picture. My wife whispered something under her breath. "We missed the signs. We should have seen this coming." She was right. In retrospect, the subtle manipulations, the offhand comments, the way she had sown discord quietly over months, they were all signs, but we had ignored them, blinded by our desire for harmony, and now we were paying the price. I moved toward her, silently determined to gather information, to understand what truly motivated this act of aggression. I asked her quietly, "Why? Why do this in front of everyone?" Her eyes met mine, icy and deliberate. "Because she needs to know who controls this family," she said simply. There was no regret in her tone, only certainty. She had planned this moment carefully, and it was only the first act in a sequence that she had envisioned long before we even realized it. And then came the next blow, a revelation that nobody had expected. One of the distant relatives, a woman who had always been observant but quiet, stepped forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but the words carried weight. "She's done this before. To others, you're not the first family to feel this." The words sank into the room like stones in a pond, rippling outward. Everyone froze. My son's jaw clenched. My wife's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. I could feel the collective tension ratchet higher, the walls of the hall shrinking under the weight of this revelation. This was no isolated act. This was a pattern, a strategy, a weaponized personality perfected over time. And in that moment, I understood that the wine, the dress, the chaos was only the visible tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lay years of calculated manipulation, quiet intimidation, and the subtle erosion of trust. Every polite smile, every conciliatory gesture my daughter-in-law had made was now revealed as part of a larger design, a strategy to dominate, unsettle, and assert power. My wife, standing tall despite the stains on her dress, turned to me and whispered, "We need to protect ourselves and him." I nodded, though my mind raced. Protecting my son would not be easy. He was still caught in the web, torn between his love for his wife and the undeniable truth of her betrayal. And as the realization set in, I knew that every decision from this point forward would carry weight, consequences that could last years. The guests, sensing the shift in the room, began to edge closer, some offering quiet words of sympathy, others merely watching in fascination. The photographer, still snapping, captured moments that no wedding planner could have predicted. Chaos, betrayal, and raw emotion all frozen in high-definition frames. Every image would tell a story. Every smile or gasp would be questioned, analyzed, and shared. And then, as if orchestrated, my daughter-in-law returned to the center of the room. She raised her chin, her posture regal, and spoke with deliberate calm. "I only did what needed to be done. Some of you just don't understand strength." Her words sent a shiver through everyone present. Strength? Or manipulation disguised as courage? The line blurred, leaving everyone unsure how to react. My son, finally finding his voice, spoke, but not in defense of his mother and not to chastise his wife. His words were measured, cautious, almost fearful. "Enough. This isn't the time or the place." But we all knew it was already too late. The damage was done. Trust was fractured, relationships strained, and the room, once filled with laughter, was now a tense arena of silent judgments and whispered fears. And as I watched my daughter-in-law's deliberate movements, I realized something even chilling. She wasn't done. This incident, though dramatic, was merely a precursor to what she had planned next, and I knew that if we weren't careful, the fallout would extend far beyond the walls of this wedding hall, seeping into family relationships, social reputations, and the bonds we thought unbreakable. And then a sudden thought struck me. We had been blind to the true extent of her ambition, and the cost of that blindness was about to come due in ways none of us were prepared for. By now, the hall had become a minefield of unspoken accusations and simmering tension. Every glance, every whisper, every subtle gesture carried weight. My wife stood poised but exhausted, her dress a battlefield scar that mirrored the chaos in our hearts. My son remained frozen, trapped in indecision and shock, while my daughter-in-law moved among guests with deliberate ease, radiating control and satisfaction. It was at that moment I realized something fundamental. The wedding wasn't just disrupted, it had become a battlefield where alliances were forming silently and loyalties would be tested. What had seemed like an isolated incident of humiliation was now clearly part of a larger, calculated strategy to assert dominance and unsettle the family. I glanced around the room. Some relatives whispered quietly, their words sharp with judgment or curiosity. Friends exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't witnessed the act of betrayal. And through it all, my daughter-in-law watched, a silent conductor orchestrating chaos with precision. I approached her cautiously. "This has gone far enough," I said, my voice steady but low. Her eyes met mine, unwavering, and I could see that she wasn't afraid. She wasn't remorseful. She was resolute and frighteningly sure of herself. "You don't understand," she replied softly, almost a whisper. "I had to do it. Someone needed to take control." Her words, calm and deliberate, chilled me to the bone. This wasn't about a dress or wine or a single moment of anger. This was about power, and she had made it clear she was willing to do whatever it took to seize it. I turned to my son, hoping he would intervene, hoping he would recognize the destructive path unfolding before him, but he only looked away, conflicted, torn between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. His hesitation was palpable, and in that pause, I understood the depth of the fracture forming within our family. My wife, sensing the need to protect herself and the family's dignity, stepped forward. Her voice, calm but firm, carried across the hall. "This is not strength. This is cruelty, and it ends now." The words were quiet, but they resonated, cutting through the tension like a knife. Yet even as she spoke, the damage had already been done. Relationships splintered, trust fractured, and the facade of a perfect wedding irreparably broken. I watched as guests shifted uneasily, sensing the gravity of the confrontation. Some avoided eye contact, while others leaned in, eager for a spectacle they couldn't look away from. The photographer clicked relentlessly, capturing every expression of disbelief, fear, and frustration. Every frame told a story of betrayal, of family loyalty tested, and of the raw emotions that had spilled unchecked into the room. And then came another unexpected blow. My daughter-in-law, sensing the shift in energy, leaned close to my son, her words soft but insidious. "You should have known who I really am. Don't let her turn you against me." The implication hung in the air, heavy and manipulative. She wasn't just defending her actions, she was rewriting the narrative, planting seeds of doubt in the mind of her husband. I felt a surge of anger, but also a deep, gnawing fear. This wasn't merely a personal attack, it was psychological warfare, carefully calculated to destabilize the family and control the perception of every witness. And she was succeeding. My son's hesitation, the room's silent tension, and my wife's restrained fury were all exactly what she wanted. I stepped closer to my wife, offering silent support. Her hands were steady now, but her eyes betrayed the storm within. "We need to protect ourselves," she whispered, and I knew she was right. The incident wasn't over. It had merely escalated to a stage where strategy and caution would be crucial. Then, almost as if timed perfectly, her next act of provocation arrived. She began directing subtle comments at other family members, remarks about who had truly supported her, who had failed to recognize her sacrifices, who had crossed the line first. Each comment was carefully measured to stir tension, to divide, to ensure that no alliance could form against her. It was masterful manipulation disguised as casual conversation, and everyone in the room felt it. I realized then that the wedding, the event we had prepared with love and care, had been hijacked. Every carefully chosen detail, the decorations, the seating, the music, had been overshadowed by fear, doubt, and resentment. And while some guests tried to maintain a facade of celebration, the underlying current of anxiety was impossible to ignore. My son finally found his voice, though it trembled with indecision. "Can we just stop this? Please, let's calm down." His words, though sincere, did little to halt the momentum she had built. In fact, they seemed to embolden her. She looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, "It's not about calming down, it's about understanding the truth." The statement hit me like a physical blow. Truth? Her version of the truth was subjective, twisted by ambition, resentment, and a desire to dominate. And the frightening part was that she believed it fully, unapologetically, and without hesitation. I could see my wife's resolve hardening. She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and spoke clearly, deliberately. "No one in this family has to endure humiliation to appease your ambitions. Not now, not ever." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that integrity, dignity, and love would not be sacrificed to control or fear. But I also knew this was just the beginning. The confrontation had escalated to a point of no return. My daughter-in-law had shown us all a glimpse of the chaos she was capable of, and there was no guarantee it wouldn't continue long after the wedding ended. And then, just as I thought we might find a moment of reprieve, she took one last action, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that sent a shock through the room. She reached toward the microphone stand, as if to make a statement, a toast, or perhaps to turn the focus entirely back on her. The implications were clear. The next act, whatever it might be, would be seen by everyone. And in that moment, I understood something vital. This wedding, meant to celebrate love and union, had become a battleground for control, loyalty, and betrayal. The story was far from over. The next moves, the next words, the next actions would define the family forever, and none of us could predict the fallout. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on us, carrying the weight of every accusation, every whispered doubt, and every fractured relationship. My wife stood tall, though the red stains on her dress were a constant reminder of what had just occurred. Every inch of the hall seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the air itself knew a confrontation was inevitable. My daughter-in-law moved forward with deliberate grace, her eyes scanning the room, challenging anyone to oppose her. Her calm demeanor was terrifying. It masked the chaos she had sown and the manipulation she had perfected, and I realized with a sinking heart that she had carefully orchestrated every moment to ensure maximum impact. I stepped closer to my son. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched his bouquet. This isn't how it's supposed to be, I whispered. He nodded, but his eyes told me he felt trapped, caught between love, loyalty, and the undeniable truth of betrayal. Enough, I said aloud, my voice firm. The word reverberated through the hall. All eyes turned toward me, including hers. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, as if weighing my threat or my weakness. I will not allow this to continue, my voice rising. Not in my home, not in my family, and certainly not at this wedding. She laughed softly, a sound devoid of humor, sharp and deliberate. You think you can stop me? That a few words will undo months of preparation, planning, and truth? Her words cut deep. Truth, that word again. She believed she was justified, that her actions were righteous, when in reality they were nothing but calculated cruelty. I felt the room shift under the weight of her gaze. Guests leaned forward, uncertain how to respond. Some looked at me with encouragement, others with fear, unsure who would prevail in this tense standoff. My wife stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the tremor beneath. You humiliated me. You humiliated this family, and you will not walk away from this without accountability. Each word was deliberate, measured, a beacon of strength. She was no longer the woman dabbing at her stained dress. She was a force of dignity and resolve, and for the first time I saw my daughter-in-law hesitate. The tension was electric. My son opened his mouth, and for a moment it seemed he might side with reason, with family, with love. But the daughter-in-law's hand reached subtly toward his arm, her touch possessive, almost claiming. "Don't forget," she whispered, barely audible. "I am your wife now. You belong to me." I felt a chill run through me. The manipulation was deeper than I had imagined. She wasn't just controlling the moment, she was attempting to control my son's loyalty, his perception, and his emotions. And in that instant, I realized the fight wasn't just about humiliation, it was about control. My wife's eyes met mine, and I could feel the unspoken agreement. We could not allow this to continue unchecked. The stakes were too high, the betrayal too deep, and the damage, if unchallenged, could ripple through our family for years. Then she spoke again, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "You don't understand me. I've sacrificed, I've planned, I've ensured that this family knows where the real power lies." My son's face fell. He wanted to protect his wife, but even he could sense the instability in her actions. He opened his mouth, but no words came, and in that silence the room grew heavier, the tension unbearable. I took a slow, deliberate breath. Control is not earned through cruelty. Power is not proven through humiliation. You have crossed a line that cannot be ignored. My words, though calm, carried authority. I had reached a point where subtlety was no longer an option. Her expression shifted slightly, the faintest flicker of doubt crossing her face, but it was fleeting. She straightened her shoulders and said, "If standing up for myself, for my rights, is cruelty, then so be it. I will not apologize." The room seemed to hold its breath. Every guest, every relative, every friend waited for the next move. It was the moment of truth, the line between chaos and resolution. My wife stepped closer to her, unwavering. "This isn't about rights," she said quietly, but with steel beneath the calm. "This is about respect for your family, for your husband, and for yourself. And until you understand that, nothing else matters." There was a pause, long, tense, filled with unsaid words. My daughter-in-law's eyes narrowed, searching, calculating, trying to find weakness. But she found none. My wife's presence, unwavering and dignified, held the room in balance. Then the moment I had been waiting for, a crack in her armor. My son, finally speaking, said clearly, though hesitantly, "Mom, you're right. Enough. This is our family, and it won't be torn apart by anger or control." The words hit her like a splash of cold water. I saw the flash of disbelief, the hesitation, the realization that her control had limits. She had underestimated the bond between mother and son, the strength of dignity in the face of manipulation. And then, just as I thought the confrontation might reach a fragile truth, she made a final, shocking move. A hand gesture, a comment aimed at an elder relative, something subtle yet piercing, designed to reignite the chaos. The room tensed again. But my wife, with calm authority, interrupted. "This is your final warning. We will not allow this to continue. The choices you make now will define how you are remembered and your place in this family." And in that moment, the storm that had raged throughout the wedding began to break, not through further chaos, but through recognition, the recognition that manipulation, cruelty, and control could not overcome integrity, love, and dignity. I could see the subtle shifts in the room. Guests relaxed slightly. My son's shoulders, once tense, eased. My daughter-in-law's gaze faltered just for a moment, the first real sign that her grip might be slipping. Yet even as the tension eased, I knew this was not the end. This confrontation had exposed the fractures, revealed the betrayals, and set the stage for a reckoning that would continue long after the last guest had left. And in that quiet, tense moment, I realized the truth. The family might survive this storm only if we held together, stood firm, and refused to let anger, manipulation, or cruelty define our relationships. The room felt like it had been suspended in time. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the music. Every breath seemed impossibly heavy. The guests had grown silent, sensing the storm about to reach its apex. Every eye was on us, the family, the couple, the one who had orchestrated chaos with frightening precision. My daughter-in-law's eyes glinted with defiance. She was no longer hiding behind polite smiles or subtle manipulations. Every inch of her posture screamed challenge, audacity, and the dangerous confidence of someone who believed she could bend reality to her will. And in that moment, I realized the true magnitude of what we were facing. This was not a simple conflict. This was a battle for the soul of our family. I stepped forward, my voice steady but firm. "This has gone far enough. You've humiliated, manipulated, and tried to control, and now it ends." Her laugh was soft but cutting, a sound that sliced through the tension like a razor. "You think you can stop me? That a few words can undo everything I've set in motion? You don't understand what's at stake." I felt my chest tighten. Every word she spoke was a reminder of the psychological grip she had built over my son and the subtle ways she had turned our family against itself. But in that pressure, I felt something else, a resolve stronger than fear. My wife, standing beside me, radiated calm authority. Her presence alone challenged the chaos, demanding accountability, respect, and truth. Control is not power. Manipulation is not strength. Humiliation is not courage. And trust, once broken, can never be used as a weapon to dominate others. Her words landed like stones in the still water, sending ripples through the guests and my daughter-in-law alike. For the first time, I saw hesitation flicker across her face, a subtle, almost imperceptible crack in the armor of defiance. My son finally stepped forward, his hands trembling but his voice clear. "Enough. Mom, I see now. You've crossed the line, and this family cannot be treated this way. We're done letting anger and control dictate our lives." The words struck her like lightning. Her gaze faltered, her composure threatened by the undeniable weight of truth. She had spent months weaving manipulation, but the combined force of dignity, integrity, and familial love was stronger than her cruelty. And then it happened, the explosion of tension I had been dreading. She slammed her hand on the nearest table, sending champagne flutes teetering dangerously. Her voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You'll regret this. I will not be humiliated, ignored, or dismissed. You think this ends here? You have no idea what I'm capable of." The hall went silent again, the air electric with anticipation and fear. Guests froze, unsure whether to intervene or step back, while my son's face paled, torn between loyalty, love, and the shocking reality of her temperament. But my wife, unwavering, stepped closer. Her eyes locked with my daughter-in-law's, and her voice, calm yet commanding, sliced through the tension like a blade. "We're not afraid of you. We will not let your actions define us or our family. The choice is yours. Continue this path of destruction or face the consequences of your actions." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a boundary that could not be crossed. And for the first time, I saw the impact. Her defiance wavered. Her voice, which had been sharp and fearless, faltered slightly. And in that subtle hesitation, I knew the tide had turned. My son, emboldened by our unity, added, "We cannot allow this to happen. This wedding is not about control or power. It's about family, love, and respect. If you can't see that, then you've lost your chance to be part of it." The room seemed to exhale collectively, tension easing slightly but still heavy. My daughter-in-law's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, for a way to reclaim her grip. But it was gone. The power she had believed she held, the fear, the manipulation, the psychological leverage had dissipated under the light of truth and steadfast resolve. And then, the most astonishing moment of all, she broke. Not completely, but enough for everyone to see. A single tear slid down her cheek, not from remorse, but from the realization that her control had been broken. For months she had orchestrated chaos, testing boundaries, manipulating emotions, and bending situations to her will. And now, confronted with dignity, love, and steadfast truth, she realized she was powerless. The hall remained quiet, everyone holding their breath. My wife reached out, offering not forgiveness, but a hand of clarity, a choice to step back, reflect, and rebuild, or to continue down the path of destruction. For a moment, the entire family seemed suspended in time. The wedding, once a celebration of joy, had become a crucible exposing the darkest corners of ambition, jealousy, and betrayal. And yet, within that crucible, the bonds of loyalty, love, and integrity had been tested and proven stronger than the chaos. I glanced at my son. His shoulders relaxed, his eyes clearer than they had been all day. He understood now. Love is not about control, respect is not about fear, and family is not defined by chaos, but by the strength to endure it together. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, my daughter-in-law stepped back, her head lowered slightly, her defiance tempered by the undeniable force of truth. The storm at last had paused. But even as relief settled, I knew this was only the beginning of recovery. Trust had been broken, relationships had been tested, and the scars, both visible and invisible, would remain. The climax of chaos had passed, but the work of rebuilding, forgiving, and understanding would continue far beyond this day. And in that moment, I realized a truth more profound than any wedding celebration. Sometimes the greatest test of family is surviving the betrayal that comes from the ones you trusted the most. The hall was quiet now, the echoes of chaos slowly fading. Wine stains on my wife's dress and scattered desserts across the floor were the only physical reminders of what had just transpired. But the emotional residue, the betrayal, the manipulation, the tension would linger much longer. I looked at my wife, standing tall and dignified, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had faced public humiliation, manipulation, and blatant cruelty with a strength that left me speechless. Her composure, her unwavering principles, and her ability to protect the family without losing herself had been the anchor that kept the day from collapsing entirely. My son, once caught in the storm of confusion and indecision, now stood beside us with clarity. He had seen the truth, recognized the consequences of unchecked manipulation, and understood that love and loyalty were not to be confused with control. That realization was the first step in healing the fractures that had threatened to split our family apart. As for my daughter-in-law, she lingered on the periphery, her defiance softened by the undeniable authority of truth and integrity. She had pushed boundaries, sought control, and attempted to dominate through fear and manipulation. But in the face of steadfast love and dignity, even the most calculated chaos can falter. That was the lesson etched clearly in everyone's mind. Cruelty may provoke fear, but it cannot overcome principle. I took a deep breath and addressed the room, not as a host, but as a father and husband determined to restore balance. This day was meant to celebrate love, union, and family, I said, voice steady but warm. And while we faced betrayal and conflict, we also saw strength, integrity, and the power of standing together. Let this day be a reminder, love is not about control, and respect is not given to those who seek it through fear. True strength comes from compassion, honesty, and courage. Guests, many still stunned by what had occurred, nodded slowly, some offering quiet applause. The words seemed to anchor the room, providing a sense of closure to an event that had teetered on the edge of chaos for hours. My wife turned to me, her eyes softening. "We survived this together," she whispered, "and that's what matters." And I realized she was right. Surviving betrayal, facing humiliation, and navigating manipulation required courage, resilience, and unwavering loyalty. But it also required reflection. The incident had exposed cracks we had overlooked, vulnerabilities we had ignored, and patterns of behavior that could have been catastrophic if left unchecked. The moral clarity became undeniable. Betrayal, whether through malice, insecurity, or manipulation, is devastating, but it can be overcome. Not with revenge, not with anger, but with integrity, love, and clear boundaries. The choice to respond with dignity rather than retaliation transforms the story into one of growth. My son, now fully present, placed a hand on my wife's shoulder, a quiet acknowledgement of the lessons learned. "I understand now," he said softly. "Family is not about avoiding conflict. It's about facing it together and protecting what matters most." And in that moment, I understood the profound truth. Weddings, like life, are tests of character. They reveal true intentions, expose hidden dynamics, and force us to confront betrayal in its rawest form. But they also offer opportunities to rise above cruelty, to strengthen bonds, and to define family on the basis of love, respect, and shared values. Looking around the hall, I saw guests quietly processing what they had witnessed. Some were shocked, others inspired, but all had glimpsed a universal truth. The strength of a family is not measured by absence of conflict, but how it responds when trust is tested and boundaries are crossed. As we left the hall that evening, the remnants of chaos slowly fading, I felt a deep sense of closure. The wedding, once threatened by betrayal, had survived. My wife's dignity had been preserved. My son had learned invaluable lessons about loyalty, love, and the danger of manipulation.
And even my daughter-in-law, though flawed, had been confronted with the consequences of her actions, an opportunity for reflection, however uncomfortable. The final lesson was clear. Life will always present betrayal, challenges, and moments of intense emotional pressure, but the way we respond, through courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to love and truth, defines not only our character, but the legacy we leave for our families. I looked at my wife one last time that night and whispered, almost to myself, "We endured the storm, and we are stronger because of it." And in that moment, I realized the most important truth of all. Trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but only through patience, courage, and the relentless refusal to let betrayal dictate the story of our lives.